Welcome to the charcoal drawing class of the house, the old building. This is a photo that I took on one of my trips in the Karoo in 2017, I think it was, yeah, or 18. I did a trip in the Karoo taking photographs of all these old buildings, and this is one of the photos that I took. I actually did a painting of this, a palette knife painting as well. But when I was looking for something to do in charcoal, I thought this lends itself very well to the charcoal. Also because it's got a bit of a different feel to the rest of the work that we've been doing. It's actually a building which is in shadow against a very bright background, but it actually makes for a wonderful contrast. So I thought it would be a very nice challenge to do in the charcoal. Okay, so what I've tried to do is I have got a printout, but then I've also got my phone as well, you know, just so that I've got my phone to reference. If I want to actually zoom in, then I can at least zoom in just to get some maybe finer details if I want to go that route. Okay, but just remember, if you don't want to go that route, you can keep it a little rougher. So if you don't want to put in quite so much detail, then you don't have to. All right, and you can just use your printed out reference. Okay. All right, so what we're going to do today is we're going to start off with the background first. Get that done, okay? Because what's nice about that is if we do the background, we want to try and get the background to go behind our building first, and then we put our building on top, just so that we don't have to fiddle with the background or faff with the background afterwards. I always find it's difficult to do this and then suddenly try and put the background in behind your house, and then you've got to try and get it to meet nicely so that it doesn't look strange and you don't end up making a halo around. All right, I'm not going to put any sky in. I'm going to leave that white for the moment. At the end, once I've done everything, if I feel the sky is too plain, and then I might put that in afterwards. Okay, but for me, I think it'll actually work quite well having this lovely white background. And then having these white but not quite so white, which will contrast against the white background. If I put a bit of a grey in the sky, then it's going to compete with that. So I think I'd rather just leave that white. Okay. All right, so we're going to start off with the background. And what we're going to do is we're going to start off with the charcoal dust first, because it's nice and soft, with the paintbrush. A soft paintbrush. So just remember, just make sure that your paintbrush is soft. It's not a hog paintbrush that's got that very coarse hair on it. It must be a soft, almost like a watercolor paintbrush. Okay. You'll see I haven't actually done any background drawing here. I'll just leave the background plain, and then I can just bring my own background in, so you can adjust it accordingly. You can change it slightly if you want to. I'm going to just first bring in those very far away mountains, and I'm just going to put those in with the paintbrush. What's nice about this paintbrush and this charcoal dust is you're going to get a lovely soft feeling. So I'm going to just sort of judge roughly where they are, and I'm just going to basically bring in my mountains. So I'm going to leave that, and I mean, I can change it if I feel I need to change it a bit later on, but for the moment I think that's fine. Okay, right, so for the next layer I'm going to again use the charcoal dust with the charcoal. I would actually call this a charcoal paintbrush, but anyway. So I'm going to use the dust and the paintbrush again, but this time I'm going to put it on a bit darker. Okay, because I'm going to erase into it. Okay, so that other section there, I'm going to put it in quite dark, so you can put a fair amount of charcoal on there. But remember, here we're trying to get the tonalities right, and it's not a very dark area that, you know, this area over here isn't very dark. So That's about the sort of mid-tone I would say that we need there. All right, and I'm going to do the other side as well, and I'm not going to go underneath there because I'm going to be working on top of this now, so I don't want to go any lower for the moment. If I need to, when I do the next section, then I will go lower. Now, so I'm going to look at that. So this is where I like to zoom in on my photograph, on my phone itself, okay, because then I can sort of see the way that the lines actually go. And I'm not going to draw a line, so I don't want you to take the eraser and draw a line, a straight line. What I want you to do is almost tap a line to get a sort of a texture. So I'm going to just show you what it looks like there, if you can see it. You can see I'm tapping just to get that sort of rough texture. So don't go and draw a line specifically. Okay. Okay, so yeah, so we're trying to follow the slope here. So that's why I don't want to draw a line straight across, because it's going to look like it's flat. You can actually see, if you look there, it's got a sort of a downhill slope. Okay, and I'm going to follow that line, but I'm not drawing a line. I'm just tapping, but still following that flow of the land. Okay. And I'm just going to get that texture in there. Getting some nice texture. I'm sort of tapping, dabbing, and you can see I'm already starting to get a nice texture there. Those little dark pieces of the little bushes, I'll put those in just now. So I'm going to just do that whole section up until where that road, that's actually a little white road over there. Let me just put that road in first. All right, so I'm going to take my razor and just draw in that straight white line that goes across there. It just breaks those two pieces in half. Okay, there we go. So I've made mine probably a little bit bigger, but it's fine. As I said, that's not that important if you change it ever so slightly, the sizes. Okay, so still following the slope and sort of looking at the tonalities there. I've got some dark and lighter areas, so I'm trying to sort of bring those in as well. Because yes, it is very subtle, but still, it's the way that the light is catching that the slope there. Because this is quite early in the morning that I took this photograph. Alright, so I've done that, the lighter sections now, and now I'm going to be putting in those little bushes in the background. Okay, so these bushes in the background. So if I look at the photograph, these bushes are quite dark, okay, and they're about the same tonality as these, okay, but I'm not going to do that here. I want to rather keep these bushes a little bit lighter, so don't make them quite as dark as that, because I want to try and keep that background to be a little bit further away. Okay, so you can put the bushes in, but what you can do is you can put them in first, and then I'm just going to use the paintbrush to soften them a little bit so that they're not quite so dark. So just give that very rough sort of shape there that I'm putting in now. You can see just the bushes going down the hill, and also by putting the bushes in, it also accentuates the fact that there's a bit of a downhill. If you want to, you can also bring in one or two of those little darker lines there that you can sort of see in between. Okay, so just bring in little, you know, those dark shadows that have been created by some of the, maybe there's a dip in the thing there. It just gives this background a little bit more variety. Look, your main subject matter is your house, but it is important to take a little bit of time with your background as well, and not just to make it too free. I always say, you know, the painting as a whole, you can never just concentrate on one section and say, okay, well, I'm not really interested in doing that piece there. I'm just going to do something, if you know what I mean. So all of your surfaces in your drawing and your paintings must always be considered. Even if you do something quickly, it must be a considered surface, okay? So never just throw yourself into it and say, oh, well, that'll just have to do, okay? All right, it must always be right. Okay, so here I'm going to just use a smaller paintbrush. So if you don't have a very small one like this, it's fine. You just use the tip of your big one. And I'm going to basically tap into that very lightly. You can see it takes off a fair amount of charcoal as soon as you tap into it with a paintbrush. But you can see the bushes are still there. And that's the sort of tonality that I'm looking for. I don't want it any darker than that. Just blow. And then just soften all those little dark bits that I brought in there as well. I'm sort of roughly following the reference. Okay, I'm not going to put every single little bush and all that exactly in there. Okay, there we go. And to me, that's perfect. If right at the end I find they're still a little bit dark, then I can actually go back into them and just make them a little bit lighter. Okay. All right, and then on the right-hand side, I'm just going to do the same. I'm just going to bring in some of those little dark shadows that I see there. It's almost like a terraced section there. If you decided to make this a hillside, then you can just leave it as it is, or you can bring in some bushes if you want to onto it. And if great, you can. If you want to bring one or two bushes into it to make that background a bit more interesting, I think I'm going to do that. I'm actually going to bring in one or two little bushes. For me, I'm going to leave that side for the moment, and I'm going to go back to this side again. All right, so here again we can see it's a lot darker. Okay, so now what I'm doing is this bottom section, you can see I'm just going directly in with the charcoal, and I'm just going to bring in some of the darker pieces first, and then I'll quickly bring in the highlights. Okay, so I just want to first get those dark patches in. So I'm just doing this slightly differently. Just going to bring in those dark areas. Then I'm going to go in again with the paintbrush a little bit. And then I'm going to go in and bring in the highlights. Okay, so just bringing in those little bushes and just really roughly, not pushing too hard on the surface here. I'm just, especially where I've already got the greys, I'm just sort of tapping and dabbing a bit. There are one or two little bushes that do sort of go up a little bit into the background a bit there. So just one or two little taps and dabs. And it's a little bit darker on the right hand side here, and then as it goes towards the left, it's a little bit lighter, not a lot. And you'll see there's some bushes on the left hand side here. These bushes here, if you want to bring those in, we can bring those in just now. If you want to rather just stick with the plain ground, then you can do that as well. But I will bring in those bushes. So what I'm going to do there, for the moment, I'm just going to do the background. I'll just leave that space for those bushes. I'll show you what we'll do there just now. Okay, so there, just to get those little dark patches in. And now I'm going to take my paintbrush, and I'm going to just tap and dab into the paintbrush. You can actually use the bigger one with this because it is a bit bigger. So there you can just tap and dab and just soften that a little bit, and then we'll just bring in the highlights afterwards. So also trying to keep this soft. I want to try and keep the texture for the house. Okay, so still trying to keep this a bit softer. It may be a little bit harsher in the actual photograph itself, but I want to try and keep this background nice and soft, and then make the textures really pop with the house. And now I'm going to grab the eraser again, and I'm also just going to dab, because remember it's a bush, okay, so we don't want any lines or anything like that, because there's no lines in here. So I'm just going to bring in some of those little highlights there that I see, just to give it that little bit of extra texture. If you find that maybe if you've got a coarser paper, you may find that you don't need to do this, okay, but just remember my paper is a little bit smoother, and if your paper has got a rougher texture, you may already see some of that rough texture there, and you may just be able to leave it as it is, and then don't go into it at all. Right, so then rather just leave it. If you like the way it looks, don't change it. All right, rather just leave it as it is. Okay, so I'm just going to bring in some of those little bits that are catching the top of those little bushes there in the long grass. So as I said, if you want to continue that, and you just continue it down to the end, and you don't want to bring in these little bushes on the left hand side, you can leave those bushes out. If you do want to bring them in, I'm going to quickly bring them in, and then you can do the same, or otherwise you can just leave it as it is. Okay, so what I'm going to do here, let me see. Okay, I'm going to use the yeah, I'm actually just going to bring in like a dark patch about the rough sort of shape of those bushes that I see. Okay, so I'm just going to bring in a rough patch. I know it looks very rough, but just up to where the highlight is. And I'm going to use the eraser to bring in the branches and all that. And then I'm just going to, so I'm just literally going to do a rough patch like that. Then I'm going to go into it with the paintbrush and soften it. And note, I'm not using the blending stump here. Remember, the blending stump tends to press the charcoal into the paper. So if I use the blending stump here, I wouldn't be able to raise into this very well. That's why we use the paintbrush, because what it does is it puts your charcoal onto your paper, but it doesn't press it into your paper. So therefore you'll be able to raise it a little bit easier. So that's a big difference between using this and the blending stump. Okay, and then what I'm going to do after that, I'm just going to bring in this very slightly grey background before I go into the bush. All right, so I'm going to take my charcoal dust, my paintbrush, and I'm just going to bring in that little grey bit in around where those bushes are there. So you'll see I'll have a dark patch where the bushes are, and I've got the lighter patch where the ground is for the moment. Just bring it down there. Here you can put in some darker and lighter patches as well, because we're going to be working into that with the eraser as well. So now I'm going to work into those bushes there. So again, just make sure you've got a nice sharp tip. So you can see this little piece of mine's got quite some nice sort of sharp tips to it. And I'm going to start bringing in the top of those bushes. So that's just those little, just the edge of the bushes that go into that dark piece at the top over there. And then I'm going to bring in those highlights that you can sort of see in amongst the dark. Just bring those highlights in there. Just squint your eyes so you can sort of see where the highlights are. And just put them where you see them. Okay, so don't put them everywhere, obviously, because you can see it's sort of highlights catching in there. And then we'll take a little bit of, we can actually use either the charcoal pencil if you find it's too, you need a finer line for those little bushes there, those little sticks. These almost like little tiny branches. So this, as I said, this is a little bit more finicky, so if you decide not to do it, it's fine. And the highlights are more just to the top of the bushes there. Remember, the bottom of the bushes are usually darker anyway. Okay, so there I've got my bushes there. So all you need is just a few little highlights like that. Maybe just bring in these ones here a little bit higher just so you can actually see. So I'm going to actually go a little bit whiter there, just so it really pops out from that background piece there. And here you can either take a piece of charcoal that you have sharpened, a piece of willow charcoal like that. So you see I've got a nice sharp edge on this willow charcoal. Okay, so that you can either make by putting it on some sandpaper and getting a nice sharp edge like that. Or if you want to take one of your pieces, your new pieces, and break it, then often you'll get a nice sharp edge immediately. Not always, doesn't always work that. But then you'll see you get a nice little sharp edge, and then you can just use that sharp edge. It's not going to last long though, okay? And then you can just bring in some of those little fine branches that you see there. And remember, the branches also aren't a solid long line, okay? So you're just going to tap, a line in there, a broken line, okay? Because it's those branches sort of go in between the leaves, etc. So it's not a one solid piece. So you just want to get that impression that you've got those little branches there. Okay, and then I'm just going to work on this little foreground piece that's in front of that little hill over there. And I'm just going to bring in those little bit of textures of the grass there. So I'm going to again just use the tip of the eraser and just bring in some highlights, and then I'll go back into it again with the willow charcoal and bring in some of the little dark pieces. Okay, so I'm just going to get those little bits of grass, just get some highlights in there. And then what I normally do is I normally go in with the charcoal a bit, and then I might go back in with the eraser a bit again. So I'm just going to bring in some of those little shadows that are underneath the grass. So you can see where these bits of grass have been caught by little clumps actually. There's actually little clumps of grass here. Okay. There's a pathway that runs over here. So you can just look quickly. So there is a path that runs from the house over here. If you just want to bring the grass up to there, you can just do that. Okay, so then you don't have to worry about that pathway there. You can leave that out. So then I'm just going to go into it with my tip of my paintbrush there, just to soften them a little bit. Here, what you can do is, if you want to, you can also use your blending stump. So if you've put some of the darks down and you want to rather use the blending stump, you can also use the blending stump here too. Alright, so this in this section you can just use the blending stump. You don't have to use the paintbrush, okay? What's nice about the blending stump is you can control it a bit more, so you can actually get like a squiggle with the blending stump. You know, whereas with the paintbrush it just basically smudges it. So here, if I wanted to actually almost bring a sense of grass in, I can actually just drag the blending stump and I can actually draw bits of grass in there if I want to. So that gives it a nice sort of texture. As I said, if you don't want the pathway, then you can just leave it out. You can actually bring that all the way to the end of your house. If you look at the bottom left-hand corner of the drawing, or the photograph, should I say, if you look at the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see that this is actually a shadow from a tree that's on the left-hand side, okay? And that's casting a shadow on the ground here. That's why it's darker there. So you can leave it light if you prefer, or you can just bring in those dark sort of textures. I'm just going to take my willow charcoal and the willow charcoal dust, and I'm just going to make a nice dark patch here. I quite like that sort of darkest shadow in the left hand corner there. And I'm just going to basically bring it up to that left hand corner of the house, because I'm going to be working over here, so I don't want to lean on my drawing. So I'm just going to put it where I'm not going to be leaning for the moment at any rate. So this foreground section here, right in the left-hand corner, you can see it's almost like little stones. So I'm not going to do any lines again. I'm going to just take my willow charcoal and I'm going to literally tap. I'm going to bring in the stones with the willow charcoal. Okay, so you can see what I'm doing here. If you look up quickly, this section over here, I'm going to basically tap to get that sort of texture of the gravel. Okay, so I'm going to tap, 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 and then I'll bring in the eraser as well and do exactly the same on top of that, in certain sections. So I just want to get that impression of gravel. If you have got a very coarse paper, normally what you could do is you could just basically take your charcoal and just drag it slightly over the paper. Then you're going to automatically get that that sort of rough texture, or then you almost like a shortcut. Okay, you don't have to do this. So. Alright, so then what I can do is I can go into this now after I've done the tapping there. I can put more tapping in if I want to. And then I'm just going to tap in with my eraser. Also just tapping and not dragging, because what it does is it sort of almost blends those taps a little bit together. It gives it a slightly more, there we go, that's perfect. That's actually working very well. That's what I'm looking for. It sort of gives it a nice texture. So I'm just sort of tapping into those little dark patches now. Now I can see it's actually really starting to look like gravel. So this is going to be the fun part. So we're going to work down again as well, because I don't want to start at the bottom and then work up, because as I said, then we're going to end up leaning on the paper. So we are going to be working down. Okay. All right. So this is going to be quite a darkish section over here. So what you can do here, if you want to use, you can take your charcoal pencil just to make the outline of the white, just to make it stand out a little bit more. Just make sure that your charcoal pencil is nice and sharp. Okay. And you can just use like a soft or a medium one to do that. And then I'm just going to basically just very finely trace that outline. I want to get it very specific. It's got quite a rough sort of shape, so I don't want it to be too smooth an edge. I want to get those little, sort of quite a roughish edge. I want to actually draw that in with this to make sure I don't lose it when I actually do the drawing, when I go into this white section. You can change it a bit. It doesn't have to be exactly the same, obviously. but not that left hand downward part, okay, because it's not black there, that's more white. So I don't want to do that. So you'll see the edge of the roof there. I haven't done that with the charcoal pencil. This little edge as well, you can also do as well, the left hand corner. Just lightly, just draw it in there with that, just to keep it there so that you don't lose it when you're busy working. Okay, now we're going to use our charcoal dust with a paintbrush here, and we're going to use a needle eraser to bring in some of those nice sort of white draggy lines. Okay, so we're going to just take the charcoal dust, and you're going to fill up that whole section there with your charcoal dust. You can see I have made it relatively dark. That's perfect, because, and now you can sort of go over the edges there. That's why I want you to draw that in with the the charcoal pencil, so that you don't lose those lines, and you can just go over them. So that shape there. What I'm doing is I'm comparing it to the background. So if I squint my eyes, so what I want you to do is squint your eyes and look at the difference in tonality between that and that. Okay, so between your sky and this, and you're going to see how dark it actually needs to be. So this is quite dark for the moment, but obviously that section's darker. So where you've got the very dark sections, what you're going to do there is you're going to take your willow charcoal, and you're going to put your willow charcoal on there, and then use your paintbrush to make it dark. All right. So so this section here, it's fine, because look, mine has gone quite dark, but it isn't actually that dark in the picture. So I'm going to be using my needle eraser to erase some of those whiter areas. Just bring in that little piece over there. So there is a little edge that comes up there. So I'm just going to draw that in lightly with the pencil there, because it is quite a distinctive sort of edge. Okay, so I'm going to bring that edge in there before I actually work in with the needle eraser. I'm not doing it too dark. You can see I'm just sort of touching it, just doing that. Okay, and then I'm going to just use my blending stump just to soften it again, because it is quite hard. You know that charcoal is harder and it's got a coarser texture. So I'm just going to take my blending stump and just blend it, just so that that dark line is a little bit softer. Okay, much easier to do that dark line and soften it with this than it is to try and draw it in with the willow charcoal, because it's just a way too fine a line to draw. What you can do now is, remember your paintbrush, you can't get that very straight line with your paintbrush there. So just take your blending stump and now bring in that edge of that roof there. And then you can clean it up with the hard eraser afterwards. Okay, so I want to bring in that grey roof, but it'll be much easier to do it like this with the blending stump, because you've got that nice tip that you can work with there. Okay, so bring in that grey part there, because remember, if you look at it compared to the sky, it's actually not white. There we go. And if you find, as I said, if you find your line isn't sharp enough, then just take your hard eraser and you can just clean it up. Okay. You can always do that at the end as well, right at the end, if you feel it's easier, or you can do it now. Maybe you could also put a ruler down there as well if you need to. If you find your hand isn't quite steady enough, you can just use your ruler. But I'm just going to basically just clean it up slightly. But it is an old roof, so it doesn't have to be absolutely 100% straight there. That's fine, as long as I've got that feeling there. Okay, now I'm going to use my needle eraser, and I'm just going to make sort of a biggish, not too sharp a tip, and I'm going to start bringing in some of those textures of almost like paint that's sort of gotten dirty and all grubby, etc. So very softly, I'm just going to bring in some white patches, and then I'll use my paintbrush to soften some of those areas. So you can bring in, you can see you can go sideways and make little squiggles. You want to get that sort of feeling of And I'm going to squint my eyes and sort of get an idea. Look, remember when you put this dark piece down underneath it, you're going to see how much whiter that actually looks. Okay, so just do what you can for the moment. And if you find it needs to go a little bit lighter or whatever, then you can make it a little bit lighter later on. But don't make it too light yet because, as I said, it's not as light as the sky. So it's not very white. It's definitely not as white as the sky. And when you put the dark patch in over here, it's going to make it pop. All right, so if you look at that now, it looks very dark, okay, but that's because you haven't got anything to compare it against. So you mustn't worry too much about that. So we're going to now work with the, what we're going to do is we're going to start working with the left-hand side over here, just so you can see the transition between the two and how nicely it works. But now we're going to go directly in with willow charcoal itself. Okay, so just grab your willow charcoal. All right. We'll first just do this little piece over here because it's just a plain area. We're just going to fill in that one little section because that's like a smooth piece of plaster. Okay, so we're going to keep that smooth. Just going to go in there with the willow charcoal, and I'll just take the blending stump and go in with the blending stump because, you know, the blending stump doesn't take off quite so much charcoal as the paintbrush. Okay, so I just want to blend that in and get that nice dark patch there. Remember always to have, you know, like one or two newer ones as well, because your point eventually does actually get quite blunt. So what we're going to do now is we're going to just do the left-hand side on the left-hand side of the door now, and I'm going to follow the direction of the brick. So I'm not going to go down like that. If you want to, you can break a piece off, and then just have a sort of a flattish piece, and then you can just go sideways like that, or you can just go in sideways, but it's actually easier just to cover the surface area. So I don't want the lines to go down, if you know what I mean. So when I'm going sideways, you'll see it already automatically creates a bit of a vertical, a horizontal feel. Okay, so just break it so that it actually is flat. If you need to, you can flatten it on a piece of paper on the side first. It's better. There we go. Okay. And I'm going to follow that horizontal thing, so I'm not going down vertically, okay? Because if I went down vertical, then I'm going to almost like already automatically get vertical lines, and I don't want to. I want to get the horizontal lines. So just all the way up to basically that bottom piece there. If you haven't drawn that in with a charcoal pencil, just go into that first quickly before you go all the way down. All right, just so that you don't lose that patch there. And then what you can do is you can maybe just put the door jamb in. Just use a ruler for that, okay? Just to put that one edge of the door in there. Okay, and then this little patch over here, so where that door, the window is as well, you can also bring in a line there with your charcoal pencil. Okay. now we can use our blending stump. Okay, and you're going to do the same thing. You're going to almost draw lines across with your blending stump. So it's not going to be that obvious in the beginning. But what I'm doing is I'm just using my blending stump and I'm almost sort of copying where the bricks sort of go there. I don't know if you can see. So I'm sort of dragging a line across, and you're going to see it's going to be very subtle, but there is definitely going to be a subtle line there. Okay, so I'm basically smudging, and I'm sort of leaving a little bit of a gap in between each line that I'm making. So I'm not putting the line, I'm not, alright, so I just want to show you here. So I'm not making a line and then on top of that line there like that. I'm making a line, you know, so I'm smudging across like this, and then I'm leaving a slight gap, and then I'm smudging across again. Can you see what I'm doing there? Alright.
Yeah.
So I want you to smudge across like that basically. So you just leave a little bit of a gap in between. Okay. And then I can already see that it is starting to get that sort of thing. Just using, not obviously the whole side of the blending stump. I'm just sort of using a little bit of the tip. So now this is where you can decide, do you just want to leave it rough? So what, you know, as I said, using your picture as a reference and using those tonalities as a reference, if you wanted to go the road of that's more like wood, then you can make it into more of a woody sort of feel. If you prefer to have it more like really rough plaster, then you can change it and you can make it like that, but then a lot darker. Okay, so you have options that you can go with there. All right. But what I'm going to show you now is, okay, first I'm going to just clean up around that edge over there, so where it meets up with those bricks. So this white section over here, I'm just going to take the tip of the kneadable eraser, and then I'm just going to go back in there and just sharpen those edges. If you want to, you can also use your hard eraser. That might actually be easier. It just depends on how much you went in there. So just to get that sort of white back again, because you want that nice hard sort of edge to show of that. So now you can judge whether or not you made this white enough in compared to the background. Okay. Okay, so now I'm going to bring in the bricks. So what I'm going to do again is the same sort of thing that we did just now, but I'm going to now draw some sort of rough lines, and I'm not drawing a solid line. I'm sort of doing this, sort of tapping and dabbing along, and I'm going to again just draw some lines. You can make the bricks a bit bigger if you want to. Okay, so if you want to make them slightly bigger, but you must use the charcoal pencil for this. Okay, and then try and keep them obviously equally spaced. Okay, so don't make them different spaces. Try and keep your spaces equally spaced. So okay, so now what we can do now is you can now bring in the down pieces. So remember, bricks are never really, you know, they're not, you know, so they're not like that. Okay, remember they're staggered.
Yeah.
Okay, so just remember your bricks are staggered. So you, as long as you've got that sort of feel, that's fine. I mean, you don't have to sit there and go, oh no, well that one's slightly smaller than that one, because this is quite, this brick wall isn't exactly made of all the same size bricks. Okay, so you can see they made it from different bricks, so you can change the sizes as well to give it that sort of sense. What you can do before you do that, if you want to, you can just go into this here and just make this edge, this nice dark edge, a little bit darker there, because it has got a slight, almost like a slight shadow where it's been cast by the plaster there. But just make it quite a thin line, don't make it too thick. Okay, so don't make a thick black line, just to give it that, you can see it pops now a little bit. Okay,
Yeah.
You can bring these like almost like a crack there. If you want to bring that crack in first, you can bring that crack in there and then just draw the crack in. You can sort of see where that building's cracked slightly. So that will give it also a bit of an old feel. So you can bring in those cracks there. And then you can bring in your bricks. Okay, so now I've basically got my bricks down in that section over there. So I'm just going to stand up and I'm going to look at it now, because this is where you can really fall into the trap of overworking your stuff. Okay, so I always stand up, give it a good look from a distance, even pick it up if you need to, and put it, sort of on an easel, and then look at it from a good distance to sort of get an idea if you're getting a feeling that you want. And if you're happy with those bricks, you leave them just as they are. If you want to make them a little bit more detailed, if you prefer to make them a little bit more detailed, you can do that. What you can also do is you can leave them, and then at the end of your drawing, once you've done everything else, then you can look at them and say, okay, do they need that little bit of extra attention, or do I just leave it as it is? Okay, but what I want to show you is what you can do. So I'm not going to do that with the whole picture now, but what you have that option is like at the end, for instance, if you do want to change it, what you can do then is you can take your blending stump, and then you can go into one or two of the bricks themselves like that, okay, and then just sort of add a bit of variation to them. So you can see then what I'm doing there is, as in the picture there, they're slightly lighter on the one side. So what I'm doing is I'm just making them slightly different in texture in one or two places. So you can do that and add a bit of variation to your picture, and that's quite quick to do, because now you've already got the little blocks that you've drawn, so you just basically work into each block. Okay, so you can do that, and then that'll make your bricks a little bit smoother. But of course it also depends entirely on how smoothly your charcoal went down initially, how rough your paper is, etc. Okay, so remember, it won't necessarily look like mine, it might look completely different. Okay, so don't stress too much if it doesn't look exactly like mine, just because my paper happens to be smooth. Right, now you can do that other little patch there, just exactly the same as you did the top white area, so to speak. You can do the same there with the paintbrush and the charcoal dust. Okay, so this top piece of the house here, very similar to what we did with that over there, but because you can't go so dark with the charcoal dust itself, I'm going to go in with willow charcoal directly. Okay, so I'm going to literally go in with the willow charcoal. I'm going to fill in that patch there. I'm not going to go as dark as the bricks, obviously, but it is relatively darkish. So I'm going to put the charcoal down. Just be very careful when you get up to the roof side there, that little top piece there, just do it carefully. And that's why we sketch there as well, just so that we sort of know where those other little cracks and things are. I want to get rid of those. And then I'm going to use my paintbrush there quickly, and I'm going to blend that in with the paintbrush. Okay, so you can see now you can get quite dark. So the left-hand ones, the ones towards the bottom, aren't as dark. It's just the top piece of that roof which has got the sort of very darkish marks there that I'm going to do this way. The rest I will do with the paintbrush and the dust. But I'm obviously here that I'm going to do the windows first and the brickwork, and then I'll do those there. So I just want to do this top section first. Get that done. Then I'm going to work down. I'm going to do the window, the bricks, etc. And then you do exactly the same as you did with this white piece over here. You just take your needle eraser or your hard eraser, whichever suits you best, or you can use both, and you bring in some of those marks there. Okay. So like I love what I've done there now. For me, that really looks great. It's got a lovely sort of feel to it. It's sort of nice and rough, and it's got the nice dark textures. And I mean, for me, that's fine. I don't need to make it any more textured than that it is there. I'm just going to bring in the charcoal pencil now and bring in some of those little cracks that I see there. And then I'll just use the blending stump to maybe just smooth them out ever so slightly. So I'm just going to make those thicker lines where I see them. so I'm not going to continue on the right here, and now I'm going to carry on with my window, my door, and my bricks. Okay, so you can just stop for 1 sec. I'm just going to show you what I'm going to do here with the window frame. Okay, so I am going to be outlining the window frame with the willow, with the charcoal pencil itself. Okay, just so that I've got those edges defined. All right, so I'm going to use the ruler. I'll bring in these lines over here with the ruler. Okay, and then once I've done that, then I'm going to use my willow charcoal, and I'm just going to fill that in again with the paintbrush. Okay, so I'm going to first quickly just do the outlines with my ruler. Okay, just so it's just easier. Alright, so to do this woody section of the door, of the shutter at the top and this bottom door, what I'm going to do there is I'm going to take my willow charcoal, and again it's quite dark there, and it is definitely darker at the top than it is at the bottom. Okay, so I'm going to make that quite dark at the top. Alright, but again I'm going to follow the direction of the wood. Alright, so I'm going to go down vertically. Alright, so I don't want to go down, I don't want to go sideways, because this always immediately gives me an impression of wood. Okay, so I'm going to keep on going down. I know it is quite a small section, so it's a bit more awkward. Alright, and leave a little bit of white there. Okay, so I want you to have a little bit of white showing there, okay, for the moment. And you can see, like, immediately that almost looks like wood automatically. So I could actually just leave it like that, and it would actually be fine. Because I would see that it is going in, if that makes sense. You can see it's deeper in because I've put the dark shadow at the top. Okay, and then I've got those sort of lines going down. Okay, but what you can do if you want to, you can go into it with a paintbrush slightly, and then just drag slightly down to give it more of a woody feel. So you can do that, and then I'm just basically, because the paintbrush picks up a fair amount of charcoal, but also just using the vertical lines going down. So I've still got that woody feel. If you found that it looked fine before and you don't want to do this, then don't do this. Okay, so then just leave it as it is. As I said, if you can get away with doing it a shorter route, then do it that way. And then I'm just going to use a sharp pencil again, and I'm just going to bring in one or two of those cracks there that I can see. That's just me bringing in a little bit of detail there. Let's do the door. Okay, exactly the same as you did the window at the top there, but you can see there's obviously a lighter and a darker section to the door, so you can bring in those textures as you see them. Okay, so again, you must just follow the direction of the wood. So just go down with your charcoal, not sideways like you did with the bricks. And I'm going to bring in feeling of the wood. I'm just going to use the tip of my paintbrush though. I'm not going to use the whole side, so I'm just going to drag down using the tip of my paintbrush to get that woody feel, and quite softly. Okay, I'm not going too hard, but I am following the direction of the wood, because the paintbrush sort of scratches into the charcoal, so that it automatically gives you that impression of that wood there, because it literally creates those scratches, those woody scratches. Going to use the pencil for that, the pencil and the blending stump, to bring in some of the darker blacks there. Before I do the rest of the bricks and that wall over there, I'm going to outline again. Okay, so just outline those white areas so that you don't lose them. So your other way of doing this is you could do the doors and the door, the window, etc., and then do all the bricks in one go. So that is your other option as well. You can do, you don't have to do it this way, but that is your other option. Right, and then I'm going to do exactly the same as I did with the ones, and use the blending stump to drag across. Okay, so once you've got all of those lines going across, I've put all of my lines across, then I'm going to do exactly the same as I did with the bricks there with the nice sharp charcoal pencil. Just try and remember to sort of carry on with following the same line as those bricks, obviously, because you know your bricks are relatively in the same sort of place all along the wall. So try and keep with that, you know, even if you have to use a ruler as a guide or a piece of paper or something as well. So just make sure you can sort of start off somewhere just to get an idea of where that does go, and then just make sure you sort of roughly at least follow the same thickness, let's put it away, as the bricks, okay, that you have on the other side. Okay, and then I'm going to bring in those down pieces. So those whiter sections now, I'm going to just do the same as I did before with the charcoal dust. I'm going to fill it in with the charcoal dust, and then I'm going to just go into it with the needle eraser and just bring in some of those white bits and that texture back in there. And then this is where I'll bring in that edge of that roof, that dark edge of the roof. I'm just going to use willow charcoal just very carefully. So we've already got that lightish background over there, which is fine for the moment. If you want to bring in some of the extra textures, you can, but I would put that in towards the end. So if you haven't got textures already, so I have got a little bit of texture there, so I'm going to just leave it for the moment. I'll probably bring one or two small little bushes there maybe, but I'm going to first bring in this shadowed area. So if you look at the shadowed area, it's about as dark as the actual house itself. Okay, but of course it's different. It's actually ground. And at the bottom of the house, we've got that slightly finer sort of detail of some rocks and sort of stones sort of lying there, but I'm not going to worry too much about that now. You can bring that in afterwards when you want to bring in some of your finer details. So with that section, again, I'm going to just use the willow charcoal for the shadow, and I'm going to go the same way as the ground is going, so therefore I'm going to go horizontally with this. I think I'm going to rather use the blending stump because I don't want to, the paintbrush is going to take off too much. Okay, so I'm going to rather use the blending stump. Okay, and I just want you to look here quickly. So this bottom section of the ground that I'm doing underneath the house, with the blending stump, I'm going to use like a little round sort of motion. Okay, I'm not going to go lines. I don't want lines. I want to sort of have that sort of rough effect of the ground. So I'm using almost like little oval round movements. Okay, just sort of almost copy that feeling of the ground. So I don't want lines like I've got in the building. Okay, so little, you can even use zigzags if you want to. Zigzags also work quite well. So I want to get that nice sort of feel there. There's like different tonalities happening in there. So even although it is dark, it has got the different tonalities in it. All right. So so I've already got that nice shadow there. Okay. And if I look at the picture, so when the printout itself doesn't really show much detail in the shadows over there, but you can play around with the shadows. You can see they sort of go up a little bit into this white section over here. You can bring in your kneadable eraser, and you can bring out some of those rocks and that, but just remember they're not that white, okay, in comparison to the rest of your picture. So those little tiny little stones there, if you want to bring in one or two of those small little stones, you can just use your hard eraser, and then you can just literally just tap them in with the hard eraser. Just bring in some of that little detail there. Just don't press too hard. Don't make it too white. Okay, because those stones are actually still in shadow, but they actually just happen to be white, but they are in shadow. It's a bit like your wall over there. So it'll be the same sort of tonality as the walls there. All right, so if you want to bring in some of those extra rocks there, you can. The bottom of the doorway is sort of almost got like a concrete sort of area, almost like a step actually there. If you can see, it's almost like the water has gone through the house and it's actually run down the step over there. So you can bring that sort of step in there, and then just use your willow charcoal in between to bring in some darker areas. Just give that little bit of variation in here. So there's some dark little sections that you can bring in, because remember the bottom of the house actually is over here. It's below the door. Okay, so it's not actually where the door stops. It's actually just below the door. So there is a little bit of a wall section over there. It's sort of like a broken wall that you can see. Okay, if you want to stop it at the door, you can also do that. You don't have to bring it all the way down to the bottom here. So if you feel you want to stop it at the doorway, that's also fine. Because this house is sort of on a very slight hill. Okay, so That's why it's not completely level. It's obviously built up on a bit of a slight hill. And what's nice about this is this you can play with it afterwards as well. So this foreground piece is very much like the bottom over here. You don't have to bring in this texture. So if you're not liking, so Christelle, if you don't like that texture in there, rather just keep it simple ground. Okay. So, you know, that's what's so nice about the willow charcoal is you can literally just change it and say, okay, well, I don't actually like that. So let's do something else with it, you know. And then, I mean, like I can go over this now and just erase it a bit and just say, okay, well, maybe I don't want that texture anymore. All right. So, but if you like the texture, then bring it into the rest of your picture. But that part is quite time consuming. So, you know, and if you want it in your picture, then, yeah, put it in. But otherwise, go with something simpler if you prefer. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to use, I want a little bit of texture in the background because now that looks a little bit bare. So I am definitely going to bring in some of that texture in there. I'm almost going to sort of continue a little bit with what's in that background over there. I'm not going to really follow the picture. I quite like this hilly sort of feeling that I had over here. So I think I'm actually going to continue with that there. That'll be my own variation in this drawing. You know, sort of bring in those hills with a little bit of a slope, etc. So use that sort of as a reference, and then sort of make my own sort of little variation on that. So because I don't really like what's in the background of the picture there. Whatever you do in this foreground, remember that ground continues on into the shadow. All right, so you can't just suddenly change it, you know. So whatever's happening over here sort of needs to continue into the dark. All right, so if you're going to do this sort of texture over here, then it needs to sort of continue in the dark as well, if that makes sense. All right, so you have to sort of play around with your foreground and then just decide, you know, how do you want to, what works for you. Okay, so you can either copy it, as I said, exactly as you see it, or you can try your own variation, which is what I'm trying now here, and then just see how that works. Maybe just bring in, because it has to have that quite a light difference, you know, between the two, the shadow and the dark. So you can see what I'm doing here now with the texture. There's not as much texture as that side over there, but I am bringing some of that texture into the darker area as well, just so that that doesn't look like it's something completely different. Okay, so obviously the texture fades as it goes towards the back, but in the foreground here, then I'm actually literally going to bring in 1 or 2 little specks. So you're gonna have to stand up, look at it, check to see if it's working. Bring in 1 or 2 little maybe white dots with your eraser to also get that texture. So what I would do here now is go into the dark now with 1 or 2 little, exactly little dots like I've done now with the white, with the black. So you can see now that's starting to gel a little bit more. So it doesn't look like it's totally different to what I've done in the foreground. So I'm trying to get that, like you can see the section on the right hand now is starting to work. So I brought some of the dots into there, and now I've taken the tip of the hard eraser, and I've just brought in a little bit of that texture into there. It actually is working very well. Actually, I'm very happy with that so far. So you can see what I'm doing here is I'm just playing around with the putting down some marks, and then I pick up my eraser and then I erase into it, and I find that's the easiest way to do your ground, is to actually put down something and then then maybe put a few little marks on there like that. Then I'll just put a few little marks like that, and I'll go, okay, cool, and then I'll take my hard eraser and then I erase into that. So this little left-hand corner piece there, you'll just have to just make sure it doesn't look a bit odd, that it doesn't just stop. So there it just sort of stops, but actually in the picture, it's actually a bit of concrete that sort of goes around to the end over there. So I'm going to bring that in there slightly, just so it doesn't look quite so strange. If I just left that patch white, it would look a bit odd. Yeah, I think I'm going to actually stop with mine now because I don't want to overwork it and then find I've gone and done too much, if you know what I mean. So I think I'm going to actually leave it now for a bit. I'm going to put it in my dining room and then look at it a bit later. I'm just going to make this shadow behind the wall because it is quite a dark shadow that comes off. Remember, because that is creating a shadow over there. So that house is a little bit darker there. So I just wanted to bring in that subtle shadow over there on the left. Oh, sorry, on the right, not the left. It's very slightly darker. Can you see there? If you look at that, it's darker just behind the wall over there. Okay, so I have created that because that also gives it a nice sense of feeling there. So, okay. All right, I'm going to leave it as it is, guys. I'll when I have finished it, or if I feel it's finished, then I'll post a photo of the drawing at the end of the video. And I hope you guys enjoyed this class. Cheers.